All right, the next procedure is to remove this top nut, which takes a special spline socket tool, okay? Last three digits are 734. So that is gonna fit, and there's no other tool that you're gonna find that's gonna fit that nut. I think they did it on purpose. The next two tools you need is a spline socket. This is 880, last two digits, and this special fixture tool, which just holds a spline socket in there. So on the front side of the case where your pinion gear came out, underneath there's a slot in here. And that allows you to put that spline socket over the vertical drive shaft and up into the housing. And you kind of need to hold that in there while you break this loose. So being in a fixture tool on a bench, hopefully the bench is strong enough to do this. Hopefully break this loose. That's good. Now, don't forget that tool's going to fall on your wonderful floor. All right. And it is a nylock nut. It is not going to come off that easy. So at this point, what I want to do is go back and grab a 1/2 inch socket. I wouldn't recommend using an impact gun on it. That socket tool, the pieces of metal are pretty small. They're not real strong, I don't think. Okay, so we get this in position. I'll slip this back up here. And they say to keep it in the upright position because there's loose needle bearings inside the housing. When you take it apart, those can drop out, but the other thing is they want to keep the alignment of the clutches because we're going to have to compress the piston down and take a snap ring out. That's the next thing we're going to do. So while you're loosening this, make sure you hold the bottom so again it doesn't fall out on your foot. Once it's loose enough, take the nut off. We're done with that special tool for right now. Now I'm going to zoom you in, and this is the piston, and what we have to do is we have to compress that piston down, actually fish the top of the piston out, and below that is a snap ring, so we'll do that next. The next tool that you need to pull the piston top out is this special tool, and sometimes you can use compressed air, as it'll show you in the book, and it'll tell you to plug off the center and use a blowgun, and that may push the hydraulic piston up off the shaft. That's possible if it is stuck on the shaft, which can be very much possible. Then you need this very, very specific tool. This is a lot of machining, very thin passageways. They get bent real easy, as you can see, so be careful with them when you put them in there. So what I found was they don't fit right on the side real well. You have to go in from one side and then work your way around to the side of it like this. Take the other one, slide it around to the side. Now you can try to use your hands, and if you're lucky, it'll pop out like this, okay? If not, then you're gonna need this puller jaw tool, okay? And those will go underneath it, and the first time I took a used one apart, definitely I needed this tool to pop that piston loose. Once it comes loose, it'll come out. Because there's a large flat O-ring that sits on that, and that's what holds it in there. So that is the top of the assembly that holds that down underneath that nut and compresses the top of the clutch pack. So now I need a new tool, which is going to compress this and take that snap ring out. The next part is probably the hardest part of getting this drive apart, and that is trying to get that ring out, which is a snap ring. And it comes to a point, it's rounded. There's a special tool that you need from Volvo to take it out that makes life easier. So there are several different versions of snap ring pliers, and some of the older ones like Snap-on made. I'm not sure if these are in production anymore, but this early version one is one that I found online that works really, really well. It has a pointed tip. It'll work well for inside snap rings, the curved type that are used in IPS. So that version is SRP3. That's one of the ones that I found online that was on sale on eBay, pretty cheap. And then there's a common type that we use, snap ring, for also piston rings and things like that. You can use this type. It's got a little divot in the center of it, but it doesn't come to a point, so you can't really get it in for inside curved snap rings. That part number is SRP2. So SRP2 and SRP3, and those work quite well for this too. So now there's a special tool for this, which is this tool fits over to compress the piston. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tighten this down. And I may need that fixture tool again to prevent the shaft from turning. So what I want to make sure is that you can see that snap ring under there. So now what I need to do is, using this special spline socket again, and yeah, I've got to hold that shaft, is I need to just compress the piston enough. I can do this by hand. Don't go crazy because you'll crush this tool down. And just bring it down enough where you can get that snap ring out of the groove. I need to just go down, maybe a touch more. I'm going to need that tool probably just to hold it. Get that spline socket slipping out of my hand. Okay. All right, now we're clear. Now that snap ring is clear from there. Now I have to leave that on there. Now the fun part is trying to get the tool in there. Now, yeah, snap rings out of the groove. Now that you have the snap ring out, these tools again, that special tool to pull the piston off the top, come in handy now, and you can slide those underneath and grab the lip of that piston and pull it straight up. Wiggle it side to side and take the piston piece out. Now the piston has all the springs in it, and they may fall out. If you're lucky, they don't. So you can see all the springs. Okay, and they still have grease in them from the last time I put them back in this class. All right, so now what you have is you have that O-ring. That O-ring definitely is something you're going to want to change. The clutch pack exposed for the next step, which is going to be removal of that. So the piston assembly is where the oil comes up through the top, through the shaft, and it fills this gallery. And because this is held down, it compresses the clutches and locks those to the vertical drive shaft. So the upper half, there's a spring washer on the bottom that separates them, and you're going to flatten that out with the hydraulic pressure pushing down from this piston onto the clutches. So if I reach in the housing now, I can push up on that gear and take that whole upper gear assembly out. So now we have the whole assembly that has the clutches in it. So I can take this whole inner assembly out. And if I'm careful not to lose the needle bearing, there the small needle bearing is that I wanted to show you. It is very specific the way that this bearing goes back in the housing. On the inside of it, it has a raised portion on the inside, and on the other side it's cupped. So it's very important that when you reassemble it, it goes in properly. There is also a bearing race that fits on top of that, and that's oriented, obviously the cup faces the bearing, and then we have the bottom part of the retainer for all the clutches. So now the clutches, if we look at the outside of the steel plates, they mesh with the outside of the gear. So the steel plates engage the gear, and the clutches themselves, when I slide one off, maybe, have teeth on the inside. So they are splined to this inside the disc hub, okay? So if I just take all the clutches off, except for the last one, and that is actually a washer, that is a spring washer, and it is specific in its orientation. So that spring washer only goes in one way. And if you look in the book, the picture will show you that it is tapered up. So what that means is it's bowed up like this all the way around. If you take one apart that's used, and I zoom in a little bit, you probably can see the shiny area where that is contacting the last inner clutch, okay? So that goes on like this, and then the plates and the discs go on like this. So the clutch discs, and then you have the steel plates, and I'll show you the steel plates. I get one apart without dropping them, because they're a little oily. I'm going to look and probably add a picture from the service manual to this video so that you can see exactly what that looks like. So I'm going to add a picture from the service manual of these clutches and the orientation of that spacer ring to this video so you can actually get a better feeling of how this goes together.
So in this picture you can see the piston is being removed with all the springs in it. This would be for the upper part of the gear case, the top here. And as we go down through this, you can see when you pull the gear wheel out, they want you to mark that upper gear wheel. And the reason is that both the upper and the lower are identical. So once you pull out the disc hub, I just wanted to look at the, the pack and the components. And when you pull the top assembly out, you'll have the hub, all right, that supports and catches all the clutches and the clutch discs. That on the bottom, below the last clutch disc, is the spring washer, and that is tapered down this way. So you can see that it has a taper to it. Very important that it catches on the inside of the clutches, not on the outside. You also have the lower bearing, and you have the recessed cup, which is a race that fits over that. And below that, inside the case, are two cage needle roller bearings, another bearing assembly, and another cup race. This again is very important to go back together. We'll show you that later. And then another spring washer where its taper faces up.